Hello and welcome to Nocab Game Design. In this episode, I'll be playing the Chapter 5 combat operation titled Wildwood Warfare at Cloden. My goal today is to try and answer the question, how can level architecture encourage player decisions and ultimately drive gameplay?
Alright, listen up and I'll explain.
Some games are very linear. The Halo series, for example, features many levels that are just glorified hallways. There are lots of twists and turns, yes, and sometimes even large open combat areas, but there's almost always one entrance and one exit. It's linear, or in other words, there's only one path the player can take to progress. As I discussed in the Halo series, linear maps allow a designer to place content and explicitly authored encounters directly in a player's path to ensure that they see it. Link in the top right, see that video for more details. But this game is not Halo. This is the Chapter 5 combat operation of Valkyria Chronicles titled Wildwood Warfare at Cloden. In the cutscenes leading up to this, the characters talked about how dense and confusing the woods are.
The woods dull your sense of direction, and poor roads make for slow advances. This'll be our toughest operation yet.
These characters were exaggerating a little, but as you can see, the map is a bit more of a maze than any of the previous levels. Forgive me, this was the highest resolution I could get of the map. We'll just have to deal with it. There are two starting bases. Each path forks into two branches, which have further intersections and more branches. It's still unidirectional. It's clear the player starts on the left and moves to the right, but how exactly the player goes about this, well, is up to the player. It's out of the developer's control. This map demonstrates a lot of important but subtle design choices made by the developers. In this episode, I'm going to talk about this map and try to answer the question, what are the elements of good level architecture, and how can developers use these techniques to encourage player decision making and ultimately make a fun level? First, this is a high quality map, and this topic is probably the most important element that I'm going to discuss today. Everything else is going to be easier to achieve if you work with high quality assets, or more accurately, none of the other refinements I'll talk about later in this episode will really matter if the base map is poorly designed. This is the bottom of the pyramid, if you will. You need a solid foundation before you can start building the rest of the details. So what is this foundation? Well, first, it's visually appealing. All the levels so far have taken place in a city, but this one is suddenly different, a deep forest. There's even unique music to complement it. This is good design. It keeps things refreshing. Now, the art and audio assets of this level don't have any gameplay impact. They don't change the rules of the game. This level could take place in a city too, but it doesn't. It takes place in a forest. This keeps things fresh and exciting to a player. A change of scenery is a good way to make the level stand out. But that's not the only high quality element of this map. There are some quality elements that do impact gameplay. This map has been precisely measured and clearly pre-planned. I can only imagine the hours of playtesting and refinement that has gone into this level. Each path has a particular and specific length. For example, on the southern path, there are some fallen trees that block a character's progress. The only way to break these is with the Edelweiss, and this block is placed exactly at the maximum range of the tank. The exact placement of the logs and the spawn position of the tank are important here. There are no distractions along the path to cause the tank to swerve. This section has been precisely measured and explicitly placed by the developers. This is an element of a high quality map. There is no wasted space, and the movement of the game pieces feels natural. But it's not just the tank the developers measured. This upper path takes a shock trooper almost exactly one turn worth of movement before getting into a firing range of the enemy base. But there's a landmine blocking the most efficient path. A player needs to clear it out with an engineer first. Then a shock trooper can use a single turn to move into an optimal position. Otherwise, it'll take 2 turns. Now, the only way a player could know there's a landmine there is if they've already played the level, and I'll talk about replayability more near the end of this video, but this replayability originally comes from the fact that this is a high quality map. It is possible to do things optimally, to use one less turn, to deploy the correct units. The fact that this is a high quality map encourages a player to try again, but make different, more informed decisions. I can talk about both of these two examples with a fairly high degree of confidence because they are so close to the start of the level. As the level progresses, it's harder for a developer to predict the exact positions of each character and therefore harder to predict how long to make each pathway. But that doesn't mean they didn't think about it for later areas also. I'm sure the developers know exactly how far each unit can move in one turn, and have made the hallways of this level a precise distance to encourage certain types of gameplay. Having a high quality and well measured map is step one, but you can't just end there. A game designer needs to populate the map with stuff. So the natural question is, what should you put in your games and where in the map should you put it? I'll talk about this second question first. An easy answer is that you should put something at the end of your level, something big or important to a player. This acts as a pull force, drawing a player through the level. If there's nothing for a player, then why are they even here playing the level? Give them a boss fight, reward, or something to give the level a sense of completion. This level features a boss fight, a new enemy tank commanded by an enemy general, story progression, new content, and a boss fight all wrapped in one. Good design. But what else or where else should a designer place content in the level? The answer of where depends on level architecture. Open world maps are much harder to fill with content because, well, there's just more space for a player to explore. On the other extreme, linear single-track maps are much easier to populate because there's only one place to put encounters. The only question is how dense you want to make the levels feel. This level is somewhere in between. It features hallways, but they have a branching structure. It's not quite an open world map, but a developer can't entirely predict where a player will explore. Here, the developers of this level place content in two main places: intersections and midway points. Placing encounters or content at intersection points makes it more likely that a player will actually encounter it. It would be disappointing if you set up all this cool stuff somewhere in the map, but the player never sees it. Additionally, putting encounters at intersection points allows for a player to make more strategic decisions. I'll talk about how the map influences player decision making in the next section, but for now, just know that putting content at crossroads adds depth to gameplay and is worth considering. But the developers also place content at the midway points along these paths. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. There has to be something to keep the player entertained as they travel between point A and point B. Here, the developers use a mix of hidden and not so hidden contents to fill out the pathways. Some paths feature enemy guards, while others are laced with mines or other environmental hazards like logs and grass. So those are the two main locations the developers put content in the level, at intersection points and midway points. But what kind of content do the developers place in each of these locations? I've touched on it a little bit, but generally speaking, the pattern of this level is that larger, more challenging encounters happen at the intersection points, while smaller one-off or passive content is mostly found along the paths and at the midpoints. Larger encounters are fairly self-explanatory. There's an enemy base with lots of units, or the boss fight. All the big fights happen at intersection points. Small encounters likewise are also easy to understand. Instead of putting 5 troops in the middle of the path, the developers only put 1. It's just a small fight, just enough to keep the player on their toes, but not enough to stop forward progress. Passive content, on the other hand, is a little more nuanced. There are intrinsic elements of the pathway that modify gameplay. The grass, for example, is passive content. It simply exists and offers new affordances to the player. They can hide here. No other path offers that. Potentially useful. This other path is covered by tall hills, providing natural cover. This is passive yet impactful, allowing a player to get into a flanking position without taking damage. Some paths don't have these hills, which allows a sniper a clear shot. Having diversity in architecture, content, and encounters is important. If every hallway had a single guard right in the middle, it wouldn't be a surprise anymore. If every path had tall grass, then the gameplay might get samey. So, to answer the question of what and where to place content in a level, the developers set up large encounters at intersection points, while they place smaller encounters or passive content along the paths to keep them engaging. Additionally, there isn't a lot of repetition. Uniqueness and diversity is key to good design here. So far, I've simply asserted that all this stuff is good design without really giving a satisfying reason why, and as game designers, there's only one type of argument that we should consider when talking about game design: player experience. How does all this stuff impact player experience? That's a big question, so I'm going to narrow it down and in this episode focus mostly on the player decision-making process. What kind of decisions does a player make, and how does the level architecture influence that decision-making experience? Does the level design enrich these choices? Now, of course, the answer is yes. I wouldn't be making an episode about this topic if I didn't consider it to be a masterpiece example. So let's consider some case studies in this level. Earlier, I said that placing encounters at crossroad points adds depth to gameplay. What I should have said is that it adds more options to a player. When trying to assault this first base, there are quite a few ways to go about it. You can charge straight in, surprise from the side, or get around and flank from the back. These options are available to a player only because this base is at an intersection point. Now, I've talked about the complexity before. In a previous episode, I go into depth on why strategic complexity is important for good design, especially mid and late game levels. But in summary, giving the player more options effectively increases the complexity. This complexity initially makes the game more challenging, but also allows for a more skilled player to pull off more impressive maneuvers. It raises the skill ceiling of the level.
Not bad, not bad.
The branching and intersecting level architecture does more than just increase the complexity of the decisions the player has to make. It also increases the quantity. Every fork, the player has to decide, do I go left or right? Should a character circle back and give support, or scout ahead to find a hidden advantage? And in a single playthrough, a player isn't able to explore the entire possible path. This leads to the second point that I hinted at earlier. The level architecture promotes replayability. The high-quality level architecture keeps certain areas hidden or inaccessible due to mines, logs, or just because there isn't enough time to fully explore. A player may think to themselves, I beat the level, but what's down that path? Exploration is a powerful affordance. It's a main reason why people enjoy games, to escape real life and have the sense of adventure and discovery. The branching architecture and placement of roadblocks prevents a player from fully exploring the map in a single go. Some players will want to go back and finish the job. Now, too much of this technique can get frustrating. If every path is blocked or the level is overwhelming, then it stops being exploration and starts becoming boring. But I was able to explore about 80% of the level in a given playthrough, and that seems about right to me. Enough for me to get a sense of the level, but also enough mystery that I wanted to go back and finish exploring. There are also a lot of elements of replayability from a tactical standpoint. Earlier, I gave the example of landmines. Once a player knows what's out there, then they can deploy their resources optimally next time. For example, have an engineer clear the landmines, then send in the shock troopers to clean up, which will save one turn worth of action. Or, once a player knows that there's an ambush on a given path, they can send the correct unit in to take care of it. Even the intersection points and the increased complexity they afford drive some replayability. A player may want to try flanking, then charge into place. Or maybe they want to go around entirely and ignore the first base. The level architecture here offers a huge amount of possible decisions, tactics, and strategies to a player. This increased complexity raises the skill ceiling, deepening the gameplay, but it also increases replayability because a player will want to explore. Not just the physical map, but also to test out different tactics and decisions offered. All of this is only possible because the level architecture of this map is, well, good design. Thanks for watching. In the next episode, Squad 7 goes to the opposite of a forest, a giant desert with a much more open and flat map. I'll see you there.
No!